Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Entropy Podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman. If you're enjoying our content, please take a moment to like and follow the show wherever you get your podcast from. Today, I'm joined by David Bloxham, the CEO of GCS Recruitment Specialists, where he's been a key player since 1996. David is passionate about recruitment, strategic leadership, and making a positive impact. He's also the host of the GCS Leader Series podcast, where he engages with industry thought leaders to share insights and drive conversations around innovation and excellence. David, it's absolutely fantastic to have you here with me today.
Great to be here. Thanks, Francis.
David, I know we've been talking for a while, and I was on your podcast a while back, so thanks very much for having me on. I really enjoyed the experience, and kind of one of the things that I wanted to dive in with. You've been in the recruitment industry for a long time now, so you've seen all of the different shifts and ebbs and flows that have happened over the years. But in terms of cybersecurity, what shifts have you seen in demand for cybersecurity talent over the last few years? Has that changed or has it stayed steady?
I would definitely say it's changed in terms of volume, and that volume has gone up. So just to give you an example, so GCS is a global technology recruiter. We've been going as too many years now for me to even count, Francis, over 3 decades now. But we made a decision that it would be a good kind of business model for us to increase our cyber, branding, and create a division focused on it. And I guess because there has been a big surge for demand for cyber people, for obvious reasons, that is one of our fastest growing, if not the fastest growing kind of division. So yeah, it is very much a hot topic in the world that we work in. And I think when we spoke before, Francis, that's why I thought it would be quite interesting to kind of come on your podcast, which is obviously much more heavily technical and knowledgeable than mine or so. But just to give people an understanding, I guess, of the actual kind of the the outline, the kind of what it looks like hiring for cyber at the moment, because it's quite tough and it's quite tricky. It's definitely a candidate driven market.
And I suppose on that, David, I'm always fascinated with the peaks. So we've had a lot of cyber incidents this year in the retail sector in the UK. Has the pivot of that to be hire more security staff, or has that been more? Have companies been more cautious? Have you seen any sort of a reflection in the market as a result of those incidents?
It's quite interesting because we always talk quite a lot, and it is quite interesting to think about it. And we never want to be seen as, I guess you would call it, ambulance chasers in this world of being a cyber recruiter. One, I don't think it reflects very well. Secondly, it's very, very difficult to do. So I'm sure you're a lead cyber professional, right? If and when something to happen, you're probably going to get a lot of calls from recruiters saying, you've just had a hack and would you like to hire some people? But I don't think that comes across very well. Like, would you agree with me, Francis? I don't know.
I wouldn't disagree with you, David.
So I think for me, that's quite interesting. So what we see is, there is a couple of instances, and we work a lot with consultancies, and we hire and place quite a lot of contractors. So straight away within those organisations, you see the consultancies getting a lot more work, and you see them taking on a lot more contractors to kind of try and shut this down. So I think that, in the case of, incidents, major or minor, ones that you know about or not, the hiring happens on a kind of short-term reactionary basis. I guess for me, that would be, is that the right way to hire? Is that the right way to deal with it? And should you be hiring ahead of the game and preparing yourself for what seems to be pretty likely is going to happen to everyone at some point?
I wouldn't disagree with that at all. And I suppose just to pull in that thread a bit, if I'm a CISO in an organization now, and that proactive versus that reactive hiring, what do CISOs or senior leaders constantly underestimate when they're building their teams? What skills and capabilities do they need to look for in terms of the human?
Well, I think, for me, like one of the things we've spoken about, and I've talked a lot about on my kind of podcast itself with regards to cyber leaders, is there's obviously a lot of skill sets, and it's very, very easy to kind of go down the skill set, CV, resume basis, like this ticks a lot of the boxes. But I do think that, we talk a lot about, cyber being humans being the weakest link, in terms of, so I think there's quite a lot of psychology within the aspects of hiring for cyber professionals. And sometimes people don't look at that. I think they're very much more. So I could speak to someone, I could have a kind of human conversation with someone. I could think this is a really good person for the culture, someone that can really communicate with other people within the teams, someone that can really kind of roll out ethics and roll out kind of programs. But maybe their CV doesn't look quite as good as X person. So it's important for me as the agent or for a talent person to try and put forward that human. And I think sometimes, particularly technology-based managers, very much focus around the hard skills, and maybe don't think enough about the soft skills that can help to build culture, that can help to build diversity, but also can probably give you a more kind of resilient, cyber structure, because you've got lots of different types of people thinking in different types of ways.
Absolutely agree with you on the soft skills. I think they're one of the most important aspects that any cyber professional can bring to the table. You can be the most technically brilliant mind in the entire company, but if you can't articulate in simple business terms, it's not really something that can add value. So, yeah, the soft skills are super important. The ability to write clear outcomes and the ability to be able to communicate clear outcomes is so important from my perspective, especially when you're dealing with executives or senior management that are not technical and need to be able to translate what you're saying in terms of risk into something tangible for them. So that is super important.
Yeah, and another thing I think I find is really looking at things like industry experience. And I think I guess that's holding quite high standards. We've spoken there before about, and this is another reason why you shouldn't be so reactionary in your hiring. You should be proactive, ahead of the game in your hiring, because generally then people's standards go down and they don't always look for the best match. So I would say that, while when we talk about the volume of cyber, one of the reasons why the volume of cyber has gone up is because it is industry agnostic. It doesn't care what industry you're in, and every industry needs it, even if the industry isn't particularly doing well at the moment. So it's not like they're investing loads of money in XXX. Everybody needs it, so everybody's hiring for it. Obviously, for an agent at Francis, that's absolutely fantastic, right? But for the hiring community, that's very, very difficult. But I think if you're doing this in a reactive post-incident situation, then you're probably doing it with less quality. And if you are, then you're going to drop certain levels of quality. And I do think, and we've seen great examples of people with industry experience, people, if you're hiring for financial services, people coming from similar types of backgrounds. It works in all kind of areas, but particularly in cyber, because then people know what threats are, then people know how the business works, what the models are, what the structures are, what the regulations are. And that's something that we really, really try to qualify into our roles, and a good agent or talent professional would do. What are the non-essentials, what are the soft skills, what are the industry sectors, the types of projects, etc., that you need.
So let's talk a little bit about remote work. COVID kind of changed the game in terms of the expectations that employees have in remote work. What is the nuances been to it? I read only this morning Adam Grant had a post out around the dissatisfaction of the worker being pulled back into the office, and the benefits are being degraded in terms of their loyalty or how much they're willing to give, because now they're spending 3 or 4 hours sitting in traffic, and someone has to do more childcare, or not at home to cook the dinner or whatever it is. So there's that human side. But from a company, what's the challenges? Is there a change from your perspective in the security risk profile? Like, you've got a global operation of recruiters in many different countries. I'm not sure what your model is. Are you hybrid or you remote? From a CEO perspective, what are the challenges? And then from the recruitment and human side, is there a match there?
Yeah, so from a CEO perspective, we did go fully hybrid during COVID. And then slowly but surely, we've moved back to being in the office 4 days a week. Why have we done that? I think that sales, which is generally what recruitment is a very collaborative and, feel-based role, right? So it's, potentially quite different to being a cyber professional. But you need to be surrounded by people. You need to be collaborating with people. You need that energy of the sale. And it's really, really important. And so, we've done that slowly but surely over that period of time. Obviously, there's always a little bit of pushback on it. Sometimes there's quite a lot of pushback on it. But I think our industry has moved in that direction. So it seems to be the direction of travel. And I think that's the same for most sales organizations. You want to be around people. So yeah, that's what we've driven. And I do feel that it allows people to collaborate better, to work together better in teams, to train people, to induct people, to create a culture much better than you can, in a video sort of sense. I guess when it comes to technology, what we see is a lot of major organizations driving return to office, the big tech companies, the banks, etc., etc. A lot of smaller organizations either not having the will, the desire to do it, but also what you have to understand is, what anyone understands is obviously by creating hybrid in a skills short environment, by creating hybrid roles, or work from home roles, remote roles, you've immediately given yourself a wider pool to take from. And actually, in a skills short market where salaries are going, you might have given yourself, a better cost of people. And I think people do factor that in. You can get more people at better cost, rather than asking. So if you're hiring in Dublin, for instance, Francis, and you said they have to come to the office 4 days a week, then you have to hire people in Dublin, and people in Dublin are more expensive than people in Sligo or something. I'm kind of making up names here, but you know what I mean. So that seems to me to have been less prevalent, less pushed. I do think that remote work has definitely changed the profile in terms of, the culture, the types of people. We both probably worked from home during COVID, and that was a really strange situation, wasn't it? And then when you come back, it feels very odd. And then after a while, it feels really normal. And then it feels really odd to work from home. I'm actually in Florida this week, actually, Francis. So I'm visiting our Florida office. So you talk to us being a global business, but I think it's actually kind of 1 degree or something, isn't it, in Ireland today? It's 28 degrees where I am.
Absolutely freezing here, David.
So the joys of having a global business, and they work from home on Wednesday, so I'm actually kind of working from suburban Orlando at the moment. So I could switch my screen around so you can see the blue skies and the sun, but I think everyone will be a bit jealous of me. So obviously that gives you a lot of, really great positives. We have seen obviously a lot of, in terms of types of requirements when it comes to IAM, access management, obviously cloud security, all the things that you need to run a hybrid business, those become so incredibly important. I never quite know, is it more secure to have everyone working from home because people are more secure on their own systems, or is it more secure in the office? Because you still go into the office and use the same equipment and go onto the Wi-Fi, don't you? I'm not a technology person, but I don't know which is. People are usually quite secure in their homes, but so yeah, that we've seen huge rises in the types of requirement that companies are looking for to facilitate, application security, cloud security, different access management tools, XXX, because this change has happened. So again, I think that having people in the office is great for culture, but it also has a lot of, positives having a remote based work, but it definitely changes the kind of the hiring profile.
It does, and it's interesting. For me, the most bizarre change from remote work was the hiring process in and of itself, and the ethics of what do you wear to a remote interview. I've interviewed some people. I swear to God, they must have been in their pajamas. Like I was like,
that's cool. That's cool with the kids these days, though, Francis. They just wear pajamas all the time, So yeah. I've got 3 teenage daughters, so they're always in pajamas.
So that took a bit of getting used to, but look,
it's really interesting you say that, actually, because obviously for all businesses, agencies, COVID was a really, really tough time. If you think about how the recruitment process used to work before, like we would send someone to an interview with you, you would like them, then maybe another interview, then you'd offer them the job, and we never even thought about working from home or whatever. And when COVID came, immediately they couldn't do the interview anymore. So, we were totally flummoxed. It's like, I don't really know how we're actually going to run our business. Like, it doesn't make sense. But it's very, I mean, talk about technology, it's very, and security and that sort of thing is so quick, how quickly these different systems, which are now so prevalent now, so Teams or Zoom or whatever, it just came in so quickly. And now, we as agents, you as technology professionals couldn't imagine a world without them.
We wouldn't be able to work without them, I suppose. And I suppose you wouldn't be able to have a global operation without them either, because you wouldn't be able to have that connectivity and, that, I suppose, camaraderie with your colleagues, and that you can get facilitated through technology. And I suppose, speaking of technology, AI is something we're going to have to touch on. We can't leave this conversation without having a conversation about AI. But one of the things that I found really interesting about AI, I had a guest on recently, Paul Boudre was his name, and we were talking about the jobs market. I think, David, we touched on this the other day when we were chatting as well. And I was saying, I'm looking online and people are sending out 60, 70, 80 CVs with no response. Like, what's going on? And he started laughing and he said, blame the fax machine. And I was like, what do you mean blame the fax machine? He said, well, before that, you wrote your letter, you probably hand delivered it, and someone opened it and read it, and you got that human connection. Then the fax came, and you could disperse it a bit quicker. Then email came, and you could disperse to many people all at once, and it was great. And then I said, then AI came along, and now AI writes your CV, it reads the job post, it sends the CV in for you. Two AIs meet in the hallway, have a coffee, and decide you're a good fit for the job based on your CV. And then some guy lands in front of you, and he doesn't match the CV at all. So I suppose that's where recruitment and the recruitment agency almost becomes a key factor for the human vetting phase now, that people aren't wasting hours and hours on, I suppose, not fit candidates.
It's a real problem. Firstly, in terms of volume that you just spoke about, obviously one of the services that we provide, and I don't know if AI can provide it, because obviously if you don't trust the CV. So the first thing to say is, I think it's almost like the death of the CV, AI. Everybody, why would anyone write their own CV now? You almost want to see a handwritten CV, Francis, which you still could probably do on AI, right? But if I've ever received a handwritten CV now, then I would know it was entirely done by you. Okay, if every other CV must have been co-piloted or GPT'd or using one of the tools, because it produces a great CV. So that's the death of the CV. Not in terms of people won't use it anymore, but just in terms of this being a good example of, are you a good candidate? Because every CV will be perfect and perfectly written in a very similar style, and we see that. But for instance, I put a job ad out, a promoted job for GCS. It's quite a good job, senior position within our business. We're looking for an SOW consultancy lead if anyone's interested. But I got 173 responses. Okay. And out of that, we found some fantastic candidates. And I was doing the job myself because it was a senior position. So I thought, well, I'll leave it. That'd be me and the candidate, not kind of stretch out over different people. But 176 responses, and out of that, I basically chose to interview 6. Now that's really good for that is a good number. But I was getting some really amazing responses. If I'd been trying to place a VP at a major bank or a head of practice for McKinsey or something like that, then I'd be really happy. But I wasn't, but just fantastic candidates. So it's really important to kind of go back to them. But what I think is important there is that we as agents filter a lot out. We filter a lot out. And like you just said, in America, it's an actual real problem now that there is a huge amount of like fake candidates. We have to constantly check, speak to people, make sure that it's the right person turning up, checking IDs, that sort of thing. I think this is quite American. something for America, but usually what happens here will happen there. Yeah, there's huge amounts of fake candidates, phishing emails that we get, um, wrong profiles, etc., etc. And we have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. So AI is increasing the volume, decreasing the trust, and making any form of filtering incredibly more important, but also much more difficult. When I started in '96, would never have thought, is this a real human being that I'm speaking to?
And that is it's an unbelievable problem to have,
Yeah.
and it's a real problem because we're seeing North Korean assets infiltrating organizations to commit espionage now. Like it's reported on, it's in the public domain. People who have been recruited as somebody they are not, with skills and competencies that they don't have, with a purpose of exfiltrating data from organizations. So like,
Even when you're on
how
an interview, Francis, even when you're on an interview, right? Like you turn up for the interview, and if you're not the person that you say you are, again, as cyber professionals, I guess you have to kind of consider what you're actually going to say in the interview, because you have to give people information in an interview on a job spec, because otherwise they don't really know. Like I used to recruit for MI5, back in the day, for a while. It was always quite exciting, but they could never send you a job spec, and also they had to sign an NDA and they couldn't say what questions were asked in the interview. But I guess that huge amounts of kind of companies should think about that now, because particularly in a cyber interview, you're giving out quite a lot of information about the systems, the projects, what you want the person to do, how many people there are working there, your personal interests, XXX, which is all quite interesting information for someone nefarious or a bad actor.
so reconnaissance by interview. It's a new threat we need to add to the threat matrix, David.
I think so. I've never, I wouldn't know whether it's happened before, but one of the reasons why we always worry about fake candidates is because we think it's other agencies or people, different companies trying to find out information to kind of get the job so they can send CVs, right? But there are much bigger forces at play that could be even more, nefarious than that kind of. It might hurt GCS a little bit.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's a nugget right there. That's a God. I'm gonna have to change our interview questions.
I'd love to tell you what the company does, what we use, and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think I trust you yet. I don't even know if you're a real person, so I can't say anything. So
I'm gonna start it off. You tell me what I do. See how good you are with your
and if you
open
know
source.
too much, then I know that there's something wrong. So yeah. No, I think it's an important thing to think about. And again, that goes back to what we were saying. That face-to-face trust, collaboration, being together. Even with things like cyber, like don't click on that link, don't do this. If you're sat next to someone, you can turn around to them and say, "Do you think I should click this link? What do you reckon about this email I've just received?" It's much better system than sitting there on your own and talking to the dog about it or something like that. People in offices, I think, will be more secure.
I suppose that's the CEO in you, David. That's a good plug for back to the office.
Totally, yeah. Then I don't know. I just think, and also in an interview, I guess you should probably meet someone face to face before you hire them. Particularly for a cyber role, I think you need to make sure they are real and they are what they say they are, because as we all know, it's so easy to fake videos, but it's very, very difficult to fake a face-to-face meeting.
It is, and I think that not only is it hard to fake it, but you need to understand the essence of the person. Are you going to be a good fit in this organization? Can you communicate with me at a level that I can work with going forward, etc.? So no, the human aspect I don't think is going anywhere fast. And I suppose that leads me on to ask, you've scaled GCS up to a global operation. I'm always interested in leadership and the lessons that people learn along the journey. When you look back, you started in '96, we're in 2025 now, on the cusp of 26. What's the hardest leadership lessons you've learned over that period of time, or even the shifts in how you've had to operate?
Well, it was interesting you just mentioned about the facts there, because that was one of the first lessons I had to ever learn, which ages me, is that how to use the facts. And to this day, I hate fax machines. I just hate them. Fortunately, they don't really exist anymore, do they? But for any of your kind of listeners who want to kind of go back, it's a terrible thing. So that was probably the lesson I learned, how to send faxes on my first day, that I hated. I think for me, those kind of leadership lessons that I've got is, you know, I think we all know that we have positive traits and areas for improvement, right? So for me, it would be things like hard work. I think I'm quite innovative, very customer focused. I can be quite charismatic on a good day, if you know what I mean. But I have my weaknesses, which would be I'm a bad loser. Sometimes I, have a lack of empathy. Quite passionate, can sometimes spill over into anger. XXX. The thing I've learned in leadership, and I've learned this from different people and obviously mentors, is that those as you move up in the organization and become more of a leader, those negative traits have a bigger effect. Particularly in the sort of kind of the traits that I've just said. So people will really, really worry if you don't seem like you're positive and controlled and calm. And it could work in other ways, right? If you're not a hard worker, people will really, really, think, well, they don't work very hard, so I'm not going to work very hard. So it always kind of has this effect kind of going forward. So I think it's really important to know yourself very well, to know what you're good at and accentuate those things, and also kind of work on yourself. And I think it's also really, really important to surround yourself with a great team that you trust, that are ambitious for the business and for themselves, that you like, that you can kind of get on with, and really hold tight to that. I mean, you probably, again, Francis, have worked in good teams, and when you work in good teams with people that you love and that you like and that are there for you, that's priceless. It is priceless, and you've got to be very, very careful, and very, very focused on making sure you've got a great team around you. If you have a great team, it's easy to be a great leader.
I think that self-awareness is a very good point. I remember a few years back, I got sent on a leadership development course, and we had to do this role play where, there was a scenario and a couple of coaches were in the room, and I had to sell an idea of a strategy to them, and at the end of it, they bring it back in and they give you feedback, and they said communication was spot on, very clear, very driven your task, but lacked all sense of empathy. And I said,
you sound like me, Francis. That would be my feedback too.
It took me back, and I went home to my wife, and I said, they told me I have no empathy, and she goes, I could have told you that, you wouldn't have to pay anything.
You don't have to pay the thousands of pounds to find out. No, totally.
So now I'm more aware of it.
I think it's a difficult one to deal with, because I always think your strengths and your weaknesses kind of balance each other out. Your strengths are your weaknesses. But empathy is a hard one, because you really, really have to think about it. If it's not in your muscle memory to really understand, people, then as a leader, you have to really think about it. I'm probably painting myself as a complete ogre now. I'm quite a nice person, but
Look, I think it comes with the territory. You're so focused on what's next and let's get the job done that you may not just take that minute to say, and how was your weekend or how was your day? So I do check myself on that now. Maybe I've gone too far the other way.
That's right.
maybe I'm being too nice and not getting enough done. So we'll have to
shaky things up. Yeah.
So it is. David, I wanted to talk about, so when we talk about leadership and decision making, when you scale up to a global operation, how do you keep the culture and that ethic, and how do you keep the decision making sharp when you're so dispersed across the globe? As the CEO, I'm assuming different time zones, different cultures, different ethnicities, different people, and they're all in this mesh that makes up GCS Global. How do you manage the ebbs and flows there, that you keep everything sharp and succinct, and you keep progressing and moving forward as the times change?
Well, one of the things that's quite fortunate is you do need to kind of see people face to face every now and then. So I do get to kind of go and visit our US office or our kind of international offices. So you do get to still get a bit of international travel. And I think that's really, really important. I haven't been here for a year and a half. I've spoken to the people every day on Teams and et cetera, et cetera. But you have to go and, really get to know people and spend a bit of time with them, because otherwise it does become too remote. But I think, we spoke about remote working there. And when you've got a global business, you can't help but be remote from each other. When we say get everyone in the office, we don't get everyone in the same offices. They're in different offices. So the things that we tend to do as a business is very much constant communication. Making sure that everyone's aware on Teams or channels or email or whatever of what's happening in the business, about driving kind of cross global working, different work streams across internationally as well as location based. And I think that's really, really important. You have to set that up, and you have to live that yourself. I love speaking to people within the business, not just my direct reports. And I don't just do it because I am telling someone off or, having, have some mad strategy chat. Just call them up. So how's it going? I think that's really, really important to have that. And I always use this ivory tower CEO. You want to do my, staff intro. I specifically say to them, I am not an ivory tower CEO. Like, you can call me, you can ask me a question, and I will ask you a question. I think people like that. I've been told people like that because, and maybe it's the size of the business, but some people say, I can't believe that, like, the CEO just called me. That's mad. But I think it's good, and it's something I like to kind of promote. And the reason I do this, and the other thing I think is really, really important, is how do you create culture? You create culture by, I believe, leading from the front and loving it, loving your job, loving what you do, and being passionate about it. And therefore, you're passionate about the people, gamifying the job, talking about the job, going on podcasts, talking about how great GCS is and all that sort of thing. It's really, really important that you are there, leading from the front and doing it and living it and being in that culture. I think that communication and culture and driving it and meeting people and seeing that as a really important part of your job is one of the reasons why you can create a global business, because it's, as the CEO, it's your job to bring everything together under one culture and one thing. One thing I will say on it, and this is interesting being out in the US, is it is, particularly in a sales organization, you need to be aware of things you can't manage over time zones. So there is only a 4-hour window really between, like, East Coast and, like, Europe, or West Coast and Europe, and even less window as you go towards kind of San Francisco and California. We've got people now working in Australia, and there's really no window. So you need to know that you trust those people, that you have touchstones with those people, but you also need to give them those independence, because otherwise that doesn't work either. If they're waiting to speak to you all day to make a decision, then you haven't got an agile business. So yeah, you've worked in big corporates before, and that's always a struggle, isn't it? Kind of with the time zones, and the further people get away of actually kind of interacting with them in any meaningful way.
Yeah, it's all trust based, really, isn't it? It's the trust that someone can get on with the job and get it done when everyone else is in bed. And if there's a problem, they'll make sure in a timely fashion. But you might be picking up on it for a couple of hours, So yeah, it comes with the game. Dave, before we finish up, I suppose I can't let you go without asking you, how do you spot a trend and what's coming next? So we've obviously had AI, we've had cloud before that. What do you see as emerging? Is it still AI for the next couple of years? Is there something else taking over? What's the market telling you?
Well, the way I learn is by speaking to my consultants, by going on as many client meetings as possible, by listening to interesting podcasts. It's just like this entropy one, I've heard about, Francis. It seems to be really good, and actually it's one of the reasons why I do the Leader Series, because you get to speak to such interesting people who are engaged and talking. So it's about building those, going to the exhibitions, building a network, listening to podcasts, listening to people, talking to people. picking up on new strings. When we spoke, obviously, Francis, you talked about quantum, and we are now starting to see, quantum computing coming in and companies starting to invest in that as well. So you can kind of always see it. How you spot a trend is by, identifying that there is increasing numbers of, this is from a recruiter perspective, there's increasing numbers of requirements for it. And there are more requirements for it than there are people. So that will be one of our sales pitches. We will find you the people that are difficult to find. Usually the people that are difficult to find are the ones that have the newfangled skills that nobody else has got and no one else has trained up on. That's where we come in. That's what we always talk to our businesses about. So as soon as you start seeing that in a pattern, then that's a trend for us. It's quite interesting in terms of LinkedIn. That we worked with a software a few years ago called RDK, and when you're trying to put in a software, unless a certain amount of people put it in as a skill in LinkedIn, you can't add it as a skill in LinkedIn. I think it has to be 100 people. So quite a good learn. So as soon as you start to see it appear in a skill, then it's moving forward. But I do think that as recruiters and probably as technology professionals, you have to kind of see what's coming. When it comes to AI, I think we're at the tip of the iceberg, both in terms of how this will change working culture, but also in terms of the types of roles that are coming. We've seen a lot in the last 2-3 years. It's been difficult for our business, very much an engineering focused, software engineering focused business, that it changed the way coding was done. There was less coding jobs almost immediately, which was bad for us. Now there's huge amounts of investment in AI and cyber, kind of almost like related, like brother and sister or something. And that has obviously helped our business to kind of push forward. But I think we're just touching the AI, top of the AI iceberg. We do not know what's going to happen in the next 2-3 years, and it will drive businesses. My thoughts on AI is that I don't think, while it enhances jobs and this seems very cool, I don't think anyone's really got great business benefit off it yet. But there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of investment going in. So you'd hope that someone is going to really, really get kind of benefit off it. So I think it will change jobs. I think it will change the types of jobs, and those are the trends that we're predicting. This will, in 2 years' time, the jobs that we're working on will be very different to the ones we're working on now.
Yeah, it's very true. I had Kyron Atreides on this week on the podcast, and I asked him, "Will AI take my job because it replaces me, or because the boom bursts?" And he said,
"Yeah,
the latter."
Yeah, I don't think I would be amazed if people start to AI cyber. Like, that would be mad, in my opinion. I'm not obviously the CEO, but giving the defense of your own company and your own data to AI, one, I think would be illegal and unethical, but secondly, like, mad. You need, like, yes, use AI tools to defend your premises and all that sort of thing, but you need human beings to kind of work that out. I'm always quite a positive person. I think it will enhance business as opposed to reduce jobs. It will change jobs. And like I said, it's not that good yet. Maybe in the next few years it will be better. So can go back to the bubble. I don't think the bubble will burst because they haven't really achieved anything yet. So, like, keep investing because there's some great things. We're seeing a lot of work in biotech, and obviously defense is a different type of thing. There's a lot of work in defense, a lot of work in financial investments, that sort of thing. So I do think that there are areas where it's starting to have real prevalence, but it's not the finished article yet. So I don't think there can be a bubble blowing up because no one actually knows the actual answer of, is this going to help us yet?
At least you give me the strapline for this episode. David Bloxham says you would be mad to replace cybersecurity talent with AI.
100%. 100%. I would be very, very surprised. There's always got to be someone with their hand on the tiller saying this is not right. We need to do this, and it can't be a robot.
No, I don't think so. Look, David, thanks very much for coming on today. It was a real privilege to have you on the show, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Francis. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you.